here by hands, this is their first summit. Okay, what do you guys think so far? I mean, good week, good training? All right, awesome. It doesn't stop here. You go home and you just continue learning. And there's a slide coming up where I'll show you where you can continue this. All right, but first, you've all seen this right now. Silence your cell phones unless you want me to come down and answer your phone for you, which I will do, free of charge. And if you need to take a call, that's fine. Just go ahead and exit on out. But as I was saying, Pass has so much to offer. You have the 24-hour Pass, which was just last month. You have local user group. Who here is part of their local user group? All right, for everybody that didn't put their hand up, find your local chapter. Go out to pass.org and look for your local chapter and join them. They're all like-minded people, and they'll welcome you, open arms. SQL Saturdays. They've been brought up a few times here. I've heard them called little mini summits. I mean, there are a lot of good training sessions there, and it's free. You just go on a weekend. Some places have them during the week, but it's free. And then the virtual chapters. Right? So this is everything that Pass offers you. Take advantage of it. It doesn't stop this week. All right, so who am I? So my name is Jim Dorame. There's my LinkedIn. I tweet a lot. I'm a director of data and reporting for a large educational assessment firm in the Minneapolis area. I've been working with SQL Server since 1995. Truth be told, a little bit before that, back when this little company called Sybase had it. But the next point on this slide is the big thing to take from this. Right? Each new version of SQL Server provides another learning opportunity for myself and for you. I mean, just look at this week. Monday, 2019 went GA. Azure Data Studio, Azure Machine Learning, SQL Server 2019 Big Data Cluster. I mean, think about all the stuff you get to learn. I mean, it's just incredible. And Microsoft just keeps giving that to us. All right, well, today we're going to talk about JSON. So here's our agenda. All right, so the first thing is, what is JSON? Who here, by show of hands, knows what JSON is? All right, you're all developers, aren't you? Right? Because that's whoever uses JSON. It's just developers. No. Look at Azure Data Studio. All your configurations are in JSON. Most of your configuration files are JSON-based. So it's not just for developers anymore. All right, we are going to do a comparison between XML and JSON. Get ready to go for that ride. And then I'm going to show you how JSON is implemented within SQL Server. Now, first and foremost, there is not a JSON data type in SQL Server. They did not give that one to you. But that's OK. All right, who remembers when they first put in XML? I think that was 2005. Was there an XML data type at that time when they went in? I think you had to put it into text. It didn't come until the later versions of SQL Server that they gave you an XML data type. All right, and I'm not saying that they are going to be doing that, but this is our first run at doing this. All right, now I'm going to show you how you can use it. All right, so what is JSON? No, not that JSON. This JSON, all right? Have to throw it in there. Last week was, or 2 weeks ago was Halloween. Come on, guys. All right, so JSON is been around since 1999. So it's not that new, but sort of new. It stands, it is based off of JavaScript 3rd edition. And it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So yes, it is JavaScript, but it's just an object notation. It's how you describe it. And this is the key thing I want you to take away today. It is a data interchange format. That is what JSON is there for. All right, it is based off of two structures. It's very simple. You have name-value pairs, and you have an ordered list of data, just arrays. That's it. Very simple, very clean. Any programming language can use JSON. And when I say any, go out to json.org and look at the languages they support. You will see Fortran. You will see COBOL, BASIC, all the languages, because it's just a data interchange format. All right, it's a way to pass data to and from your applications, or your web pages, etc. Configuration files. That's what it's there for. It's not a data storage system. All right, so where is it being used? Well, like I said, web applications, RESTful APIs. This is the language of the web, is JSON. You need to transfer data between APIs. You need to make a call and get that. It's going to come into a JSON format to you. Databases that support JSON, there are quite a few on the market. First one being Postgres. And you do have MySQL, MongoDB, and any other document database. Look at Cosmos DB. That's JSON. Right? It supports the Mongos. It supports the Cassandras. So it's used in a lot of databases. Then we have our evil neighbor, Oracle. And now, in SQL Server 2016 and above, you can use it natively. All right, XML versus JSON. Who here is using XML in their database? I feel sorry for you guys. Oh, when you get through this, you're going to want to go back and convert it all to JSON. You'll love it. All right, so here's a standard XML document, right? You have books, book, title, author, opening tags, closing tags. Looks normal, right? That's your XML.
I just find it ironic that you put just one and then
Yes, sorry.
you wrote a blog on shredding XML.
Yes, she did.
Saved my backside.
Our favorite author, Jess, who you have to thank for me being here. She's the one that kicked me in the butt to do this. All right, so XML is hierarchical. You have elements, which are your tags. Those elements can have attributes. You can build those out. You can have nested as children. Your values are just the text of the elements. It is self-describing. I will grant you that. XML is self-describing. However, it is extremely verbose. It is so heavy. And the main reason for that, it is document-orientated. It is a markup language, XML. It's a markup language. Its predecessor was SML, or it's based off of SML. So that is what XML is. It is a markup language and document-orientated. Now I've got the same information in my JSON object here. I define my books array, I give it a title and an author, and I'm done. A lot cleaner, isn't it? All right, so JSON is hierarchical also. You have squiggly brackets, which are your containers or your objects. Your square brackets are your arrays. Remember I told you that here's you got your array information, and you just build it out. Your names and values are separated by a colon, and those are your members. So think about that. You have members, objects, and arrays. That's how you start talking and working with JSON objects. Now, each of your items of an array, they're separated by a comma. So you open your square brackets, and you put an object in, add a comma, you can put another object in, put a comma, you can add another object in. Normal array. It is also self-describing. But again here, it's not as verbose as XML. You have no closing tags. Now yes, you have to remember to close your square bracket or close your squiggly bracket, but it's not as daunting of a task. And here's the big thing. JSON is data orientated. It is meant to transfer data. It is not a markup language. It is not document-based. All right, so which one? You guys are stuck with XML. That's what it was. XML back then was the big thing. Everybody was going to use it. Well, they do have some similarities. We did see that. Right? They're both self-describing. You can have all this information. They can be the same. But when it comes right down to it, which would you rather work with, or if you had to create or look at, JSON or XML? I can tell you right now, I can sit down with your favorite editor, Notepad++ or whatever, and I can create a JSON document relatively simple with very few errors. Try doing that with any XML document of any significant size or complexity. It's just not as easy. And JSON has arrays. I mean, that in itself is a winner right there. All right, I'm going over this and over this and over this so everybody understands this. JSON is data only. Right? XML is data and metadata. Both of them have their place. But if all you need to do is deal with the data, JSON is going to be your answer. And yes, both of them can be indexed. And I'll show you how to do that. All right, so JSON and SQL Server. All right, it is supported. Now, before we go, there is, like I said, there is not a JSON data type. You store this in an nvarchar. And if you know the size your JSON is ever going to be, you can give it an nvarchar value. Typically, you don't know how big your JSON is going to be, so it's an nvarchar max. Microsoft has given us Json Functions to manipulate and work with the JSON. They've given us 4 JSON. It sounds just like 4XML because it kind of works the same as 4XML. Only I think it's a little bit cleaner, and we'll get into that when I show you the demos. OpenJSON. I think this is the most powerful thing that they've added to work with the JSON objects in your database is OpenJSON. And when we get to that demo, I think you'll see why. And then I'm going to show you how to do indexing, because you can do that. All right, so first off, we're going to go through the functions. If Microsoft has given us the capability of storing JSON in our database, we probably should be able to see if it is JSON, right? So they give us a function, is this JSON? It just checks, do you have valid JSON? You get a 1 or a 0, standard checker. All right, JSON value. The JSON value returns an nvarchar of 4,000. given a JSON string in a starting position. So if you look there, you have expression and you have path. So you tell JSON value where to go into your document and pull out a specific value. If you try to do an array, you end up with an error or null. Now JSON, oh, yes? My apologies, thank you. I will slow down. I'll even go back. Is that better? All right. All right, so that's JSON value. If you need a specific value out of your JSON document. Now the next one is Json Query. This is if you need more than one value. But look at the way you call it. It's the same way. You give it the expression and then the path. You're telling it where to go to look for it. And it returns a JSON fragment. And that fragment is nvarchar max because it doesn't know how big it's going to be. All right, so get used to working with nvarchar maxes when you're working with JSON. All right, if it's not an array, you'll get an error again, or a null. Now this next one, before I go to the next, who here are DBAs? Okay, hang on to your hat. It's going to get a little scary, but we'll be fine. The next one is Json Modify. Now, where did I tell you that you're storing your JSON? What data type? Varchar max, which means you've got a column out there, right? That has text in it. And they now have given us a function to modify that text. So unless you have controls to limit who can modify columns in a database, or have CDC on, or have some other way of tracking that, you could have somebody modify your JSON and you won't know. Because you can add, delete, or update your JSON in the given expression. I can take a part out, I can put something in, I can change something. All right, and it returns the updated value of the expression as a standard formatted JSON. Any questions on that? All right, the last one is they've given us a string escape. It's just a standard. You give it the text and the type of what you want to escape, and it gives you the escaping. Right? Again, nvarchar. Now, the only escaping rules are JSON. That's all they've got right now. I do say right now. Now you see, we're getting Python, we're getting R, we're getting more things in SQL Server. Maybe there's other, maybe there'll be other types that we can actually use this on. Yes?
What do you mean by escape?
Great question. You know the difference between a good question and a great question?
You have a slide.
I have a slide coming up right next for the great question of what do I mean escaping? Well, okay, so first off, it does return, again, an nvarchar max with escape special characters. This is what I mean by special characters and escaping. Who here knew, I need to know this, who knew that a backslash was called reverse soldice? I mean, come on, everybody knew that, right? Sure, I had no clue. But you have backspace, the soldice, the reverse soldice, the question mark, or quotation mark. Then you get into the normal ones that you're seeing and used to seeing, right? Your form feed, line, new carriage returns, those. Those are what are escaped. So Json functions, let's go ahead and take a look at those right now. And before we get going too close here, too farther down the road here, I want to tell you, I've actually living the container world. I'm running a SQL Server 2017 Windows container on this machine. I don't have SQL Server installed on here at all. It's just a container. I'm running it. Embrace containers. It's going to make your life so much simpler. All right, so our JSON functions. First thing I'm going to do is get used to seeing this chunk of JSON, because we're going to use this throughout all our demos, most of our demos here. All right, so as you see here, we have data, which is it's a single element JSON. We have type, ID. We have a couple of blocks of additional JSON. We have the attributes. We have relationships. Well, what I want to do is I want to reach into this JSON object. I want to pull out title. All right. Always remember to zoom it before you start your presentation. There we go. So we're going to go into data 0. I only have one, but I got to tell it which one I want it to work with. I'm going to go into the attributes area, and I'm going to pull back title. So that's how I'm giving it the path. Remember, we have expression, and then we have the path. Let's go ahead and run this whole thing here. And there it is. JSON API pates my bike shed. That is the title. I've reached into my JSON object and pulled out just a single element. Now, it works great if you just want one element. Json Query will pull back all of it. So here, I'm going to actually back up, and I'm going to return all of the attributes, not just the title. I'll grab this, go over to trusty Notepad++. And there you go. I have extracted all members of that attribute JSON object and just pulled it back. Yes? Can I query what attributes are available in the JSON? That's a really good question. And a good question is, it's coming up later in the presentation. So yes, you can. There is a way to do an investigation, and I'll show you how to do that. Right, so here's the scary part. Json Modify. I'm going to actually update the updated date in my attributes. And there it is. Here's what it was in the JSON object. And here's what it is now. I've just changed my text string. I didn't have to do a pattern match. I didn't have to do a regex. I didn't have to do a like. I told the engine, go in, here's the path, and change that value. And store it in the new JSON object. Well, we also can get rid of it. All you need to do is give it the path again. But in this time, we're going to tell it, we're going to pass it a null. And it's removed that member out of your JSON. Now, if you want to blank out the member, you don't pass null. Null removes it completely. If you need the member to stay within your JSON object, then you need to send it an empty string. Null will delete. So the question was, would I use these to generate my JSON for my database, to generate the JSON strings? That's a really wonderful question. These are not the tools to generate JSON. These are the tools to modify the JSON you have, right? There are tools coming up for actually creating JSON right straight out of your database. All right, so we've deleted. Now what I want to do is I want to add, oh, sorry, yes ma'am. So the question is just because this is a character data type, you're doing blind faith that it's a date. Well, JSON, first off, JSON's not typed. It's a text, it's the application. Is a varchar object.
So there's nothing checking to see what you updated actually is a correct date format. You could put dash, 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 dash.
Yes. So the follow-up question was to that is there anything checking to, where I'm updating a date here? The only reason that says it's a date is because the member says I've got created and it looks like a date. I'm saying that that's a date. Remember, you're working with text. There is no typing per se. And I say per se because you'll see something later on which like, you lied to me. It's like, well, sort of. And you'll see it in some of the next demos coming up. There is a kind of type. Well, I said this is the most scary part of this right now. Right? There is no validation checking, to your point. There is no, it's hard to track it, right? Because you can't go in there and say, oh, okay, this one member in all of these records got changed, right? So in a database, you have CDC and you can say, oh, this column has changed here. I know exactly what changed. Here, it's a little bit more difficult. That's why I said this is a little scary and a little dangerous. So that's why you have to have good controls and good security, right? This week, we've learned a lot about security. Here's another reason. All right, but I want to add now, rather than deleting or updating. I'm going to add another piece. I want to have an additional date, and I'm going to call it annotation. I've now just injected another date. Now, this can go off to your application. Your applications can pull this JSON and use it. They've got to be aware if they're not aware of it when they do their parsing, their JSON serialization, they'll drop that. Right? So if you're going to be doing these things, make sure you work in context with your developers, because as soon as they go to read your JSON and serialize it, unless they know it's there, if they go to deserialize and reserialize, they could just drop it. And then I just put this in here just so people can actually see that string escape does work. So here we've got some backslashes, some tabs, some hidden characters, all of that. And there you see it's just escaped out. That's the normal process. So that's your JSON functions. Any other questions on those?
How are they as far as working with them about throwing errors or any feedback? And I ask that because working with XML and the Xquery stuff, you don't get nothing. You just get a blank result, and then you're sitting there looking through this thing trying to figure out what it is.
So the question is how are they about throwing errors? So like if you're doing a Json Modify or a Json Query or a Json value, if it's not a value, you'll get a null or an error. If it's not an array, you get a null or an error, and you get to determine what that is. It's about the same. I mean, when it comes right down to it, I was talking with somebody here this week, and they said that the JSON processing in the database is loosely based off of the 4XML processing, the XML processes that they have, which kind of makes sense, because why rewrite it? Yes?
One thing didn't discuss with the whole expression and the pathing, you can specify, there's two modes. There's a strict mode. That will return an error if a property does not exist.
That is true. Thank you, and yes, I don't have that in here. There is a strict mode that you can use. You can set, and it will if the property does not exist, that member does not exist, it will throw an error for you. So thank you. Yes. I've not had to do the update portions of this in a large setting just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? Yes, you can do that. You could update your whole table on this, and do this. There are better ways of doing that, right? I've not delved into that side of it though. The next piece is coming up, the 4XML and Open JSON. I've actually played with and had others play with large volume sets, and I can give you some numbers on that. Just remind me when we get to that point. So the next one we have is 4JSON. And like I was saying, oh, yes, sir. So when I added, so just make sure I understand, when I added that additional annotation, is there a way to tell it to do a trailing comma on the prior line versus a leading column?
Well, because all the other ones were that way, and now then when it added the leading column, I mean, it doesn't make a difference, but...
So the JSON that was there was hand built, and I threw them at the end. I've not found a way. Have you seen any way of defining where? Yeah, there isn't really a way to define it, right? You say you want to add it. It says, okay, I'm going to put it into this area here. I'm going to slap a comma in front of it because I know I need to have a comma there. All right, so for JSON, it's similar to the 4XML calls. And I say similar because it pretty much does some of the same things. Right? But you do have limited output modes for the JSON versus the XML. Right? So the first one is you do have path for both of them, XML and for JSON. And you do have auto. Now for XML, you have two more. You've got the explicit, and then you have the raw. Neither of those are supported in the for JSON. So while it is similar, there are differences. All right, so path. Just as in for XML, you maintain full control. If you want to have nesting or additional JSON objects underneath it, all you need to do is use the dot syntax. All right, so the example being here is I'm going to have product.name, and I'm going to have product.description. That's going to create a JSON object, which is product, with two members being name and description. And you just add those in there. Now, the auto format is just exactly how you write the select statement. Now, I haven't worked a lot. It's been a long time since I worked with 4XML, but I believe it's the same type of deal with the 4XML, only 4XML is a lot pickier. The order of the columns is your select statement. Now, here's the thing. When you generate 4XML, if you have nulls, they're gone. They're excluded by default. I don't like that. There is a way to turn it off. You can say include null values. When we get into the demos, I'll show you that, but I'll show you a better way of actually handling this. And speaking of demos, so the database I'm using here is AdventuresWork 2016 CTP3. It's the only one available out there. It's CTP3, you're fine. But it was the database that was built to be able to expose all of the new features that were rolled out in 2016. So there are tables, there's a whole set of scripts that you can run that will create JSON objects for you and how to work with it. So that's the database that I'm using here. You can go and download it out of GitHub, and you have this, be able to use those. So I'm going to do just a JSON auto here on the first 10 characters from our person table. And there it is. One select statement, I've just created a JSON object. But you'll notice I have middle name, no middle name. Why is that, do you think? Nulls, yep. So you can handle that if you want just by coming down here and adding include null values. You get really good at the hotkeys for Notepad++ doing this. It is a plugin. It is really nice, yeah. Only it's a really weird combination. It's Control-Alt-Shift-M. Yeah. But here, now we have our data set is complete. We have nulls. I don't like that, though, because I don't want nulls in my data set. I want to have them nice. I'm going to hand this off, and they need to have all the members, but I don't want to have nulls. So what I do is I just wrap is null around this. That works no problem whatsoever. Works as you expect it to. And now you have all of your members, but you have a clean data set. You don't have to worry about handing this off to somebody else or having your application deal with nulls. All right, so that's kind of a nice way to do that. Now, the other thing you get with auto is you can give it a root node, just like you can with XML. So I'm going to wrap this together with a person. And there it is. I mean, that's kind of cool, isn't it? I mean, I didn't have to worry about how I was going to format this. I didn't have to worry about, I need columns here, and I need squiggly brackets here, I need square brackets here. It does it for you, just off of your SQL statement. Now, that's the auto. Now let's look at the path, where you can control more of it. So what I have here is I'm going to grab I'm going to use the employee table, and I'm going to use the person table, and we've got the bridge table here. So I've got 3 tables I'm going to build out here, the SQL statement. And I've got some birth dates. Let's take a look here. What do we get? All right, so we've got job title, names, birth date. We've got some dates. We've got some demographic information, some PTO, a standard query data set that you probably would be working with. And we do have our wonderful nulls, too. So to do this, to convert it just to JSON, so I'm just going to say all these fields, and all I want to do is I want to say path. Just going to define path. And there it is. I've built this JSON object from using 3 different tables, pulled it together, and now I've got a JSON object sitting out here. Now remember, I had nulls in there, so you look down here, the last record is the only one that's going to have a title. So I don't have a complete data set again. So remember, you have to remember to deal with your nulls. So I'll go back. We're going to use is null, and I'm going to wrap in a officers. So I'll show you real quick what that looks like. It's just normal. Path, and all of this that I'm showing you works well with path. Suppose I should run it, not just copy it. So the question was, how does Management Studio render the JSON when you click on it? Not well.
I recommend Azure Data Studio.
Yeah, I'm not running Azure Data Studio here. That's my next thing I'll be doing is trying to convert all of this over to Azure Data Studio, which should do that very nicely. So there, we've rooted it with officers. We have all of our members that we want in it. We've got our empty strings, and we're all set. So the question, the question or statement was, I stated there's no data types, but the null wasn't quoted, and the other fields were. Well, and that's why I said it's sort of not typed. I mean, it's loosely typed. I mean, that's the thing, is you're not going to have, yep, this is always this way here. I mean, and when we get into the next one, the OpenJSON, I'll show you that. So there are 5 types that you can deal with in the JSON object, and I'll show you those. One of them is string. So it's difficult to understand that typed, sort of, but it's not typed. Yes?
I'm wondering, is there a limit on the number of records you can return here? I mean, if you had a database or a table with 1 million records, you would work just fine this way, or is there a limit?
So the question was, is there a limit on how many records can be returned? I'm not certain. I've not run into one. I've not seen one. I wouldn't think there is because it's just rendering data. It's just generating the data. That's a good question. I mean, you could probably take this database and turn it into the big AdventureWorks one and give that a shot. I've not tried that, but I don't think there is a limitation. Pardon?
Maybe limited to your memory.
That is true. Yes, it could be limited to your memory that you have in your system. Great question. What was that? Yeah, that's something I'd have to dig into a little. I mean, that's a great question. It's something I have to dig into a little bit more on that. I'm not certain on that. Really good question. But right, let's say, right, so we're actually looking at the path, and we want to control maybe making some islands in our JSON. I call them islands because they used to be called data islands way back when you're dealing with, you know. All right, so you do that, you group them by using the dot operator. So I'm going to create a JSON object called dates. I'm going to say dates dot, and I'm going to, whatever member I want in that dates group, I'll just make sure I have dates in front of it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a grouping of dates, a grouping of demographic, and a grouping of PTO. Now here's something you have to be very, very careful about. JSON is case sensitive. So if I were to create demographic with a capital D, and then I mistyped and did a lowercase d on the next demographic, I would have two sections in my JSON for demographic, one with an uppercase and one with a lowercase. So you do have to watch out for that. And that's something that will bite you. It did me. Especially if you try to spell something. Or you're doing a cut and copy and you misspelled it, and then you caught one and corrected it. All right. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and run this with all of our pieces together. We've got is null, we've got our groupings, we've got our officers. And there it is. Pretty cool, huh? All you needed to do was tell it, oh, make this grouping for me. And it does it for you. It says, oh, they want this. I mean, pretty powerful. Think about that. If to your point, if you needed to create a JSON object coming out for an application, and you didn't have one, but your application was going to call a stored procedure and it needed to return a JSON object, here you go. I think how powerful that is. You no longer have to, you can do it and send it to your developers and say, hey, look, I did this, I did a favor for you. They don't have to take care of it themselves now. Right? A pretty powerful stuff that Microsoft has given us. So any other questions on 4JSON?
So it's kind of fun to be able to pull it
You know, I love this crowd. This is great. That is a great question. Because you know what great questions are? That means there's another slide coming up right now to answer your question. So, and I didn't plant her. She wasn't here early. I didn't talk to her before. So thank you. But no, Open JSON. I think this is by far the most powerful and the coolest thing that Microsoft has given us to work with JSON. Right? This Open JSON, it's a table-valued function. Right? Table-valued function. It returns rows and columns. We love rows and columns. We know how to deal with rows and columns. We don't have to worry about squigglies or square brackets or colons or this, whatever. It's rows and columns. Just boom, right there. Now, everything I have shown you up until this point will work under any compatibility mode. It needs to be a 2016 or above database, but you can have any compatibility mode up until this point. Open JSON requires 130 or above to work. All right, so that's a key point you have to remember. I'm probably driving the cameraman crazy. All right, there are two ways to use OpenJSON. There's the default schema, and there's the explicit schema. Now, the default schema returns the following pieces. A key, which is nvarchar 4000, which is just the name of the property. A value, which is nvarchar max. And wait for it, a type, which is sort of a type. Right? So it does return that. So that's why I said it's sort of typed. And here's what your types are. You have 0, which is a null. 1 is your string. 2 is an integer. And before I get the question, an integer just means a number. It can be a decimal number. It can be a float. It can be whatever, right? The example I'll show you, right? Just because it says int, if you have the value of 32.765 in your JSON, it's going to return back as a type 2 of int. Right? So don't think you're going to, oh, I've got money, or I've got a decimal, or I've got a float. Nope, it's an int. Right? And then you have a Boolean operator. And these other two are really key points. It'll return an array type or an object. So think about that. All right, the default schema syntax. You just give it the expression, and again, the path. Right, so this is OpenJSON. It's a Unicode character expression. And where to look for it. I mean, you sense a theme here? Expression, path. Expression, path. Understanding these paths, yes, I know Xquery is path and all this stuff too, but this is a lot simpler, I would think. Or at least it was for me. All right, the other one is explicit schema. Now, I view this as it's Hadoopish. And the reason I say it's Hadoopish is you have the same expression and path, but this is where the Hadoop thing comes in. You define how you want to read that data. Right? So Hadoop is schema on read. When you put data into your Hadoop cluster, you just dump it in there, right? Who's using Hadoop here? Okay. You do. You just put it in there. Believe me, it just goes in. It's real simple, just magic happens. But when you go to read that, you get to define how you want to read it. That's one of the things that makes Hadoop really fast, is it just ingests your information, and then when you go to read it, it's schema on read. You define what it needs to be. Well, it's the same way with OpenJSON on the explicit schema syntax. You say OpenJSON expression path, and then you say width. And then you define out what you want it to be. Now, here's where it can get really interesting. Say you're working with a JSON object and it's new to you, and you want to do an investigation of that. Well, you can use OpenJSON with the default syntax because you're going to return back information of what do you have in there. And then you just roll into a cross-apply using your arrays or your objects and build that out. And then you just keep doing that. I stopped at 7 cross-applies on one JSON document on the investigation of it. But that is the power of that default schema. All right, so I'm going to show you how you can use this. It's pretty cool. OpenJSON. So we're going to use our favorite author again, Jess. And we're just going to go OpenJSON using the default. And that has told us I've got 3 elements in that JSON, 3 properties, 3 members. The first one is title, and it's a type of 1, which is what? String. And then I've got a page count of 300, which it said was a 2, which is an integer. So if you look at the JSON that we actually put in there, you'll notice here, this 300 has no quotes around it. That's how it knew it wasn't a string. All right? Now here's an example of right out of books online. I just grabbed this because it's a great example to show you quickly what the default schema can return. So you'll see here I've got info and type and some other information here. If I go ahead and run this, it returns 2 pieces. It says I've got a string and I've got a 5. What's a 5? An object. 5 was an object. So this is where I'm saying you can then take that in a cross-apply, take that value that is returned from your default schema, send it back into OpenJSON again, which then explodes that out with the default schema. And you have that information there. And if you have to, you can do it again, and then again. That's your default schema. Now here's the cool thing. If you got a developer out there, they've got a web page they're working on, and they have, say, a multi-select box that they want to pick some information out of and send that into the database. Well, you could do it with a table value function. You could do it with a list, separate, comma-separated list, and then split that in SQL Server. A couple of different ways to do it. I'm going to show you a way here that is really, really cool. I'm going to collect a bunch of IDs, and I'm going to create a JSON array. I'm going to send that into my stored procedure as a nvarchar or whatever, and I'm going to utilize OpenJSON, and I'm just going to do a join to my table. And I've now selected the information that I need from my table from what was passed into the SQL Server. Pretty cool and pretty powerful, isn't it? It's a default, it's just there for you. Didn't have to cross-apply because so the question was, I didn't have to cross-apply. And no, you don't, because you're creating a single JSON array. Arrays, remember, are just comma-separated values. And utilizing the default schema returns a key and a value. It takes that value, and I do a join, and I'm done. Pretty powerful there. So now let's move on to the explicit schema. So I forget, somebody had asked the question, could I take JSON and pull it out and then insert it into my tables? Somebody in here asked that question. And this is how you do that. You'd use your OpenJSON. If you wanted to take the information out of your JSON document that you were getting and bust it apart and not store the raw JSON, or store the raw JSON someplace else and use the information that you already had to populate tables, OpenJSON is how you would do that. And remember I told you that JSON can be hierarchical. Well, did you realize that you actually can create relationships within JSON? You can. If you look at this sample document, I have a relationships tag right in there. I'm building a relationship between the included and the upper side of it. You notice there I've got ID. So think about this. You could take this document, pull out the pieces that you needed, insert them into your tables, and you already have the foreign key relationships pre-built for you, if you trust your developers. And we all do, right? Every one of us. They can do no wrong. So the question was, is the relationships a keyword? It is not a keyword. It is just built that way in this document. Right? You could have another document that says linkage. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use OpenJSON here. And with the explicit schema. So as you see here, I'm using the with format. I'm defining type as a varchar 20. And this is where you can define your types when you're reading that information out. So if you wanted to have a date, you could define dates as a date here, and it would do its level best to convert it for you. Right? I have name as a varchar 20, author ID is an integer, and as you see, the rest of it's there. That's how I'm doing, and I'm only doing a portion of the whole document. You notice that I've given it the object, which is at JSON, but the path I'm going to is $.include. So it goes to the include area, and then it pulls out those pieces. Right? .type, .id. Then I go down to the next portion here, and I'm going to start pulling out other members of this JSON document. So I'm just taking this JSON document and I'm pulling the pieces out that I need to populate my tables with. Let's go ahead and look at what that does. So there you go. Top record is going to be my insert into my child table, or parent table, sorry, and the bottom record references that. I've now built or inserted into a relational model from a JSON document. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you, all of these demos have been working with pre-contrived objects, variables I've defined out. This all works against tables, no problem whatsoever. Now, let me show you that here. I'm going to show you some times also. So I'm going to select the top 10 records of the JSON sales order table. And it has two JSON objects, or two JSON columns, order items and info. Info comes down later in another demo. We're going to use order items right now. So if all you want to do is go into that order items table or column, and I want to pick up just this one tracking number. So I'm going to use JSON value to pull out the tracking number from my JSON order items piece, put my equating in there, and then go through, and as you see, I'm pulling out the carrier tracking number, the product number, the product name, item, so forth. Who notices something a little bit different about this one? I have square bracket 0. Why do you think I have that? Exactly. So if I have more than just 1 in here, 0 is going to bring back just the first entry of it. I'm going to go ahead and run this, and we'll see what we get. So there it is. I've now just pulled out, again, it's in a table. So about this, if you've got JSON on your table at home, here you go. This is how you can do it. But wait a minute. I just pulled out the first element here. I know there's more than that in this one carrier tracker, because I looked. So how do I get all of them? Well, what do you think? What would I use to get all of the values? Any ideas? OpenJSON. What does OpenJSON do? Goes in based off of a path and pulls the information for you. So here's a combination of using JSON value and OpenJSON, all in one statement. I'm going to use the JSON value to limit it to this one carrier tracker, but I'm also then going to do the cross-apply to pull back all of the information, all the product numbers, the names, the price, the total, out of that order items object. I don't have to go one by one. OpenJSON says, here's the information you get. So let's go ahead and look at that. So there, that one tracker number had 12 items. I didn't specify 0 through 11, did I? I just said, here's my tracker number based off of 0, the first element of that, so I can pull that in there. Now go and get the rest of it and bring it back for me. I mean, think how powerful that is. Right? You didn't have to worry about all the other pieces. It just dumped it out into rows and columns for you. All right.
When you're exploring some of these files, is there equivalent select star? Or do you have to explicitly call out all the columns that you want to pull out?
So the question was, when I'm exploring some of these files, is there an equivalent to, say, select star, right? Or do I need to do the width for every single one of them? So what I would do if I'm exploring a new JSON object that I'm not certain of, I would use the default schema, because that way it would tell me what that object has. right? So it breaks down a key, it gives you the key, the value, and then the type. That's what I was saying is that if, say you had a JSON object that you had 7 members and then it had another embedded array. Well, you'd get 7 members plus that array, which would be a type 4. I would then do a cross apply, taking that value from your type 4, sending it into an open JSON again with the default values, which then explodes that out. Now you know all the pieces. Right, does that make sense? So there's not really a select star. You have to kind of work a little bit at it. All right. So indexing. You can index JSON. But before you start, yay, it's not like an XML index. You must create a computed column. And then you can create a virtual index on that column. Now, here is an important thing to remember. JSON indexes are collation aware, right out of books online. The results of the JSON value function is a text value that inherits its collation from the input expression. So if you have multiple collations in your database, be aware of this. All right, I'm going to show you how to do it. So I've got that sales order. Remember, we had the info column. I'm going to select the top 100 here. I'll show you. Order items and info are the last 2 columns of each row. I am going to create a virtual column called vCustomerName using JSON value. I will then create an index on that column. Oh, wait a minute, it gave me a warning. All right, maximum key length for a non-clustered index is 17. Why do you think I got that warning? What was that? It's not nvarchar max. Remember, I did a value. nvarchar 4000, yes. So, but no, so it created that. So I have a, let me go ahead and do the execution plan here. Oh, no, I got to get rid of this. I want to do the execution plan before. So let's go ahead and run this query, or this stored procedure. There's a stored procedure out there that goes in and pulls the information out of that table. It's relatively fast, but let's look at our execution plan. Clustered index scan. Let's go ahead and add that index back on there. Now let's look at this. And we have our index seek. Pretty cool. So you can index this stuff. If you need to work with it, you need performance on an indexing, add your indexes. JSON value is your friend. All right, so in conclusion, go back. Whatever. What I wanted to say is Microsoft has given us a lot of tools to be able to work with JSON now in the database. You no longer have to export it out and give it to a developer and hope they remember what they're supposed to do with it and then send it back to you. You can help them. You can create the JSON to send it out. So they no longer have to do the serialization. All they need to worry about is, okay, I'm consuming an object. Or they can send you a JSON array and you can do a straight join. So my point is, play with these tools. JSON's not going away. You're going to start seeing more and more and more. Become comfortable with it. Embrace it. Love it. It's going to be your friend. So please fill out the session evaluations. If I did something good today, Tell me. If I sucked at something, tell me. That's how I get better. And we're going to even bribe you. We have until next Friday, and there's prizes. But thank you very much. And if you have questions, come on up after.